Have you ever wondered how to pass information to a program when it's executed from the command line or terminal? Well, there's a neat trick for this, called command line arguments. These arguments allow you to feed data directly into your programs, providing them with the necessary inputs right from the get-go. Imagine a program as a machine in a factory. This machine needs materials to work on, and that's precisely what command line arguments are. They are the raw materials you provide to your program, allowing it to process and give you the desired output. Now let's talk a bit more about these command line arguments. They can be accessed in many programming languages, including C++, through the parameters of the main function. When you're executing a program, you can pass in these arguments, and they'll be available to you within the program through the main function's parameters. You might be wondering, why are command line arguments even important? Well, they are a key part of programming. They allow for flexibility and dynamism in your programs. With command line arguments, you can customize program behavior without having to change and recompile the code every time. In essence, command line arguments are a way to make your programs more adaptable and responsive to user inputs. They can save you a lot of time and effort in coding, especially when dealing with different scenarios or environments. It's also worth noting that command line arguments are passed to the program as strings. This means if your program is expecting numerical values or other types, you'll need to convert these string arguments into the desired data types. And always be cautious of potential buffer overflows if your program expects a certain number of arguments and they're not provided as expected. So now that you have a basic understanding of what command line arguments are, let's delve deeper into how they work. First, we need to understand the main function parameters in C++. Now, in the world of C++, the main function can be written in two ways. The first is simply int main, without any parameters. However, when dealing with command line arguments, we use a slightly different version, int main, int argc, char *argv. Here we're introducing two parameters. The first one, argc, stands for argument count. It's a simple integer that tells us how many arguments have been passed to the program. This count includes the program's name itself, which is always the first argument. The second parameter, argv, is a bit more complex. It's an array of character pointers, essentially an array of strings. Each string in this array represents an argument passed to the program. The first element of this array, argv, is the name of the program, while the subsequent elements, argv, argv, and so on, are the additional arguments provided. Let's visualize this with an example. If you were to run a program with the command /my_program arg1 arg2 arg3, argc would be 4. This figure includes the program name and the 3 additional arguments. Meanwhile, argv would be /my_program argv would be arg1, argv would be arg2, and argv would be arg3. Remember, all these arguments are passed as strings regardless of how they look. So if you're expecting numerical data or other types, you'll have to convert these string arguments into the appropriate data type. It's also important to be mindful of potential buffer overflows, especially if your program is expecting a certain number of arguments and they are not provided as expected. With this knowledge, we can now start to understand how command line arguments are used in a C++ program. Next, we will examine an example of a C++ program using command line arguments. Envision a simple program that makes good use of command line arguments. The first step is to include the necessary libraries. In this case, we need the iostream library to enable input and output operations. The main function has two parameters, namely int argc and char *argv. The argc parameter represents the argument count, while argv is an array holding the actual arguments. Our program starts by checking if there are at least 2 arguments, including the program name. This is done using an if condition that compares argc with the number 2. If the condition is met, the program enters the if block where it prints out the program name and the provided arguments. The program name is always the first element of the argv array, so we access it using argv. We then proceed to print the rest of the arguments using a for loop that iterates from 1 to argc, printing each argument on the go. On the other hand, if the condition is not met, meaning there are less than 2 arguments, the program enters the else block. Here, it prints a usage message that prompts the user to provide more arguments. This is an essential practice to ensure that your program is user-friendly. The program then concludes by returning 0, signaling that it has run successfully without any errors. In this example, our program is straightforward, yet it efficiently demonstrates the use of command line arguments in a C++ program. It shows how to access the arguments, how to check their count, and how to print them out. Remember, command line arguments are passed as strings. If your program expects numerical values or other data types, you'll need to convert the arguments to the appropriate types. It's also crucial to be aware of potential buffer overflows if your program anticipates a certain number of arguments but doesn't receive them as expected. This example illustrates how command line arguments can be used in a C++ program. Now let's see how this program runs from the command line. In our previous scene, we had a brief look at how a C++ program can use command line arguments. Now we're going to see how that program gets executed from the command line and what the output looks like. Imagine we've written our program and saved it as myprogram.cpp. We'd first compile it using a C++ compiler, such as G++, to produce an executable file. We won't go into detail about compiling here, but once done, we'd have an executable file named my_program. To run this program from the command line, we'd type /my_program, followed by any arguments we wish to pass. In this example, let's say we're passing 3 arguments, arg1, arg2, and arg3. So we'd type /my_program arg1, arg2, arg3, and press enter. Our program then springs into action. It reads the arguments we've passed, starting with the program name itself, which it recognizes as /my_program. Then it moves on to arg1, arg2, and arg3, reading and storing them in the argv array. Our program then checks if we've passed at least 2 arguments, including the program name. Since we've passed 4 arguments in total, it goes ahead and prints out the program name and the arguments we've provided. The output that we see on our terminal would look like this: program name /my_program, arguments arg1, arg2, arg3. The program name is displayed first, followed by the arguments we passed. Notice how each argument is separated by a space, reflecting exactly how we input them in the command line. Remember, these command line arguments are received as strings. If your program expects numerical values or other data types, you'll need to convert these string arguments accordingly. And there we have it, a simple yet powerful way to feed data into our programs. Command line arguments allow us to interact with our programs in a dynamic and flexible manner, tailoring the program's behavior to our needs each time we run it. As you can see, command line arguments provide a flexible way to input data into a program. Let's wrap up what we've learned today. Our focus has been on command line arguments, a potent tool in the world of programming that allows users to pass information to a program when it's executed from the command line or terminal. This feature can be particularly useful in C++, where command line arguments can be accessed through the main function's parameters. We've seen 2 signatures for the main function, the first one being int_main, which doesn't take any arguments. The second one, int_main int argc char *argv, does. Here, argc is the argument count, representing the number of arguments passed to the program, and argv is an array of strings containing the actual arguments. We explored an illustrative example of a C++ program that uses command line arguments. The program checks if there are at least 2 arguments, including the program name. If there are, it prints the program name and the provided arguments. And if not, it displays a usage message. It's a simple yet powerful demonstration of how command line arguments can be used in practice. Running the program from the command line was our next step. We saw how /my_program arg1, arg2, arg3 results in the output, program name, /my_program, and arguments arg1, arg2, arg3. Here, /my_program is the program name, and arg1, arg2, and arg3 are the command line arguments. Lastly, we discussed that command line arguments are passed to the program as strings. This means that if numerical values or other data types are expected, they would need to be converted. Moreover, it's crucial to be cautious of potential buffer overflows if the program expects a certain number of arguments and they are not provided as expected. Remember, command line arguments are a powerful tool in your programming arsenal. Use them wisely, and you'll open up a new world of possibilities in your coding projects.